Jurisdictions that impose reasonable limitations on the public carry of firearms show markedly lower rates of gun-related deaths.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Bless you.
I'm allergic to BS.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hi, folks. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 289. Thank you so much for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week again this week. We're glad you joined us. And as I promised last week, we are doing another episode of Clinging to God and Guns. And so joining me once again, the pistol-packing padre himself, Pastor John Bennett. Welcome back.
Thank you, Lloyd. It's always fun to do this.
Absolutely. And I have a tall glass of whiskey because I figure we're going to need it. We haven't done one of these in a while, and they always require whiskey.
I have 3 different bottles that I might be emptying tonight because they all just have a little bit in them. So, yeah.
Pour them all in together.
Yeah. And I got a little bit of a toothache, so if I'm slurring my speech, it's either because I had too much whiskey or it's the toothache.
Oh, ouch. All right. Well, today comes to us via the wonderful folks over at bearingarms.com, where we found this article. As you may or may not know, the Supreme Court, they heard arguments, was it this week or last week? I think it was... I guess it was last week. Last week. They heard arguments in a very important gun rights case, New York Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruen, a case that could make shall issue the law of the land around the nation, depending on how this case goes.
That'd be awful nice.
That would be awesome. It seems like the prospect of that actually happening, based on the questions that the justices were levying in the oral arguments, it looks like that we got a good chance of getting this done. And of course, that's got the social justice warriors in America's, leftist mainline churches in a fit of pearl clutching. And so we're going to be breaking down their objections to the case today. But first, I do want to give a shout out to the fine folks who make this show possible. The members of the Reformation Gun Club today, a special shout out to Brian from Riverton, Wyoming, George from Hammond, Louisiana, JJ from Toms River, New Jersey, Scott from Granville, Ohio, Turbo 1889, Stephen from New Bern, North Carolina, Stuart from Spanaway, Washington, Tamara from right up the road from me here in Durant, Oklahoma, and William from... trying to remember where Duncanville, Texas is. It's right down the road, not far from me either. And so thank you all for your support. Thank you to all the members of the Reformation Gun Club. This show is listener funded, and that means that we rely on the generosity of the members of the Reformation Gun Club and their monthly and yearly contributions to keep things going. We don't have any advertising. We don't have any sponsors. This little plug for the gun club is really all you're going to hear in terms of advertising today. And you can be a part of it for as little as $1 a month. You can help support the show, get access to lots of exclusive content and some cool perks, and the satisfaction of knowing you helped make this possible. Check it all out at armedlutheran.us/gun club, or look for a link in the show notes. All right, so let's set the stage for those of you who are unfamiliar with the case at hand. The New York State Rifle and Pistol Association filed a lawsuit seeking to overturn that state's may issue concealed carry law. Now, what that means is In New York, and I think 6 or maybe 7 other states, you have to petition Big Daddy government and show good cause to get a carry permit to allow you to carry a firearm in public. So you have to prove or demonstrate that there's some dire threat against you that necessitates carrying a firearm for self-defense. Otherwise, the state will turn you down. They will say, well, you don't really need it.
Right.
So
right.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's like you almost have to show up, apply in a full body cast, claiming that,
Right.
Guido had just beat the heck out of you because you didn't pay back the loan or something.
Right. And so basically, unless you've got, like, so you're a woman who's got a restraining order, what proof do you really have that to provide to the state that they would accept as proof that you're under threat? So it allows the state to basically say no without, to limit the number of
Right.
people to basically people who are connected.
Well,
right.
Yeah. And this kind of has an interesting intersect with the Kyle Rittenhouse case. There was this, and I don't know if you heard about this tool from the Lincoln Project. These guys are basically fascists in everything but, except for a name. And this guy had tweeted more or less that what we need to do is pass a law that denies you the argument of self-defense if you knowingly go with the firearm into a dangerous area.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the mindset of your average leftist right now. Ultimately, it's you don't have the right of self-defense.
Yes. So this is what we refer to as may issue. So you may carry your firearm if the state allows you to, if the state agrees that you have a need, as opposed to what we have here in Texas. And I'm not sure, I think Minnesota, where you are, that it's called shall issue,
Yes.
where the state must grant you a permit as long as you're not a prohibited person.
Right.
Like a convicted felon or a drug abuser or an illegal immigrant or if you're under 21.
Yeah, and I don't know if other states are like this. Minnesota, and now it's surprising that Minnesota has these laws, considering that we're a blue state. I actually know the guy who was instrumental in getting concealed carry passed in the state of Minnesota, and it's. You have your application, and of course it's egregious. You have to pay like $100 for your application. It's good for, I think it's 5 years. You have to take the class. You have, depending on who you get to do the class, it's anywhere between $75 and $100. But you apply to your county sheriff's office. They have a requirement by law that they must issue you a permit within 30 days of your application.
Right.
Unless they have the background check turns up something suspicious. So,
yes, I think Texas is that way as well. I'm not sure how quickly. I think it's 30 days. I know I believe that's the case in North Carolina, where I moved from, with the laws that just passed the year that I moved. Now, Bearing Arms reported that a group, and this is how this came to our attention, a group of left-wing churches led by the Episcopal Church and joined by the United Church of Christ and a bunch of others, and of course the LCA, filed a rather hysterical amicus brief on behalf of the state of New York. In other words, they filed a paper with the court in support of this law that exists currently in New York. So we are going to go through the arguments, not in detail. We're going to go through some of the summaries, because that kind of the detail is not necessary, because you get the gist of it in the summary at the beginning of the brief. and just kind of try to, for those of you who are in one of these denominations and you care about your right to self-defense and your right to own a firearm for the defense of yourself and your family.
Well, more than that, if you care about biblical theology.
That too. Yes, absolutely. But you should consider changing churches, because a portion of the donations that you make to your church, the money that you put in the plate, ends up paying for this kind of nonsense. So this was discovered by Bearing Arms from an article by David Paulson in the Episcopal News Service on November 1st. The Supreme Court will hear arguments, and has already heard arguments, in a gun control case that could limit how far cities and states may go to regulate whether and when Americans can bring guns into public places, potentially increasing the risk of violence at houses of worship. This is a critical issue for our congregation. Now, this is, I think, a quote from, who is this guy? This, I think, is Presiding Bishop Michael Curry of the Episcopal Church, I believe. Even more so for faith communities that are too often the target of hate crimes. No, this wasn't. This was Reverend Gay Clark Jennings, president of the House of Deputies of the Episcopal Church.
Emphasis on gay. Sorry.
Yes.
I couldn't resist.
So these are remarks that she made to an executive council. I am proud that the General Convention has put us on record in favor of sensible restrictions, and that we are able to make a witness in this critical case, end quote. The Episcopal Church's General Convention has passed numerous resolutions over the years calling for tighter gun laws. Most recently, in 2018, bishops and deputies at the 79th General Convention passed a resolution requiring recognizing gun violence as a public health issue. Connecticut Bishop Ian Douglas, a co-convener of Bishops United Against Gun Violence, also signed the brief. He helped create the network of bishops after the December 2012 killing of 26 students at Sandy Hook Elementary in Newtown, Connecticut. Douglas, in an interview with the Episcopal News Service, raised concerns that the assertion of Second Amendment rights by the plaintiffs in the New York lawsuit could intersect with the First Amendment rights of churches and other houses of worship. The lawsuit doesn't challenge the rights of congregations to worship in gun-free buildings, but overturning government restrictions on carrying guns in public could heighten the general threat to houses of worship. Now, again, the suit doesn't address whether or not churches can choose to ban guns in their sanctuaries or on their property. So how does this heighten threats to houses of worship?
Great question. Why don't you ask the members of the First Baptist Church of Sutherland Springs?
Yes.
Here's the idiocy in all of this, is that this case deals with whether or not states should issue permits to those who request them. There are two states. I just looked this up, Nebraska and Louisiana. These are both shall issue states, but they prohibit carrying in a house of worship. So couldn't states just pass a law banning carrying in houses of worship?
Yep.
Didn't work out too great for a church in Baton Rouge back in 2006, where carrying prohibited in Louisiana. Guy comes in and shoots 5 people.
Yep.
So this is all SJW nonsense. This is virtue signaling from leftists pretending to be Christians concerned about the safety of their parishioners.
Yeah. This isn't about guns in churches or in public. And the threat to churches. It's about the Episcopal Church's opposition to the Second Amendment in general.
Right.
And you'll see that in these arguments. If a citizen is granted a permit, see what they're arguing in favor. they've submitted this brief in favor of a law that says the state can force you to show good, proper cause for needing a firearm, to carry a firearm. So the question that I would put to Reverend Gay is, if one of your congregants was granted a permit because he or she demonstrated proper cause, would you be okay with that? And I'm guessing they would still not be okay with that.
Right. Yeah, if you strip away all the nonsense in their statement, it all boils down to, we believe that guns are the cause of violence. Therefore, we need less guns.
Right. Yep. So this quote, I think this is from Bishop Douglas. This is a particularly important issue because, sadly, all too often, places of worship are targets for mass shootings, and he's not wrong there. We've already mentioned a couple. He cited massacres in 2012 at the Sikh Temple of Wisconsin in Oak Creek, in 2015 at Mother Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, of course, in 2017 at the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, which we talked about a moment ago, and in 2018 at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So the question here in this case has to do with the granting of permits for concealed carry. So my first question, if you're going to bring up these, or my next question, I've got lots of questions. My next question, when you bring up all of these specific incidents, how many of those were committed by people with concealed carry permits?
Right. And what would have happened if a member attending worship that particular service or Bible study in the was this in Charlotte? Is that where that church shooting was? The Emmanuel Charleston. Thank you, Charleston. There it was a Bible study. What would have happened? How would it have ended if one of the people in attendance just happened to be a concealed carry permit holder and were packing that day? It's interesting that they left out in their list the West Freeway Church of Christ in White Settlement, Texas.
Oh, yes. Yep.
They left out that church shooting.
Well, and the interesting thing about that is the shooter at the Sikh temple that he mentions was stopped by a concealed carry permit holder.
Oh, okay. I wasn't familiar with that case. Yeah, okay.
It was an off-duty police officer who was a concealed carry permit holder who had a gun that day who stopped the shooter. They don't mention that, and maybe they don't even know that. Or maybe the fact that it's an off-duty police officer makes it okay to them or something. Maybe that's different.
Yeah,
because some of their resolutions and there's this brief is like 46 or 47 pages long. Most of it is just citations of their policies and their statements and articles that have been written by their news services or by their presiding blowhards. And I just lost my train of thought. I was looking for a word and came up with blowhard and lost everything else. I cannot remember what the point was I was going to make. One of the articles that they cite, I think it is a resolution, and it's probably by the ELCA, in opposition to the ownership of firearms for self-defense by the general public, that those kinds of firearms should be limited to law enforcement. So they probably don't care about the off-duty police officer who worships at the Sikh temple.
Probably not. And their ideology would essentially turn the entire country into the Warsaw Ghetto.
Yeah, just make it into a police state, and everybody's reliant on the government to come in and protect you.
Right. Well, if they had their way, they probably would be pushing for defunding the police, which has just worked out so well.
Yeah. Well, and in each of those cases that Bishop Douglas cites in that quote, the Sikh temple, the Charleston shooting, Sutherland Springs, the Tree of Life, all of them, well, I'm not sure about Tree of Life, but in 3 of those 4, the shooter was not even was a prohibited person. They weren't even permitted to own a firearm, much less carry one. And I think all 4 of them used rifles, not concealed weapons. Well, no, I take that back. Charleston, he had a handgun. So 3 of the 4, you're talking about people who use rifles, not concealed weapons. None of them are concealed carry permit holders. At least 3 of them were prohibited persons. So this is not a good example to be spouting off to begin this whole thing.
Right.
They're off to a bad start using bad examples. All right.
That should be no surprise, though.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so back to the Episcopal News Service, and then we'll get to the brief. New York officials, in arguing against the challenge to the state's proper cause law, cite part of the Heller decision in which Justice Antonin Scalia made clear that the 2008 ruling should not cast doubt on other firearms prohibitions, such as laws forbidding the carry of firearms in sensitive places. Again, the case has nothing to do with carrying firearms in sensitive places. It's entirely about how the state adjudicates applications for the right to carry.
Right.
And they keep haranguing on this. This is the crux of their argument, is that you should be forced to show good cause to carry a firearm because because you as a concealed carry permit holder are a threat to houses of worship. That is the core of the argument here.
Which is disgusting on its face.
Yes. Yeah. So let's see here. Let's look at some of the claims in the amicus brief. And this is a friend of the court brief filed on behalf of the presiding bishop and president of the House of Deputies of the Episcopal Church, who we've quoted from earlier, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, that would be the ELCA.
Lutheran in air quotes.
Yes, quote unquote Lutheran. The General Synod of the United Church of Christ, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, the Union of Reform Judaism, Women of Reform Judaism, Men of Reform Judaism, Kids of Reform Judaism. Sorry, no, there's no such thing as Kids of Reform Judaism, but there might as well be. They've got a group for everybody. Church of the Brethren Office of Peace Building and Policy, Reconstructionist Rabbinical Association, Reconstructing Judaism, which sounds like, I don't know.
Sounds like Chuck Schumer could get on board with that group.
Yeah, it sounds like it's just basically a bunch of liberal Jews who want to change what the Old Testament says. And more than 400 individual clergy and faith leaders from, guess who? The United Methodist, Presbyterian, Episcopal, ELCA, United Church of Christ, Mennonite, Disciples of Christ, African Methodist Episcopal, that would be the AME Church, Church of God in Christ, Unitarian Universalist, American Baptist,
wait.
Cooperative.
Unitarian Universalist.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that's basically a bunch of hippie New Agers. It's
not
Christian by a long shot.
Exactly. And so basically, this is a veritable who's who of leftist Christian, Jewish, and heretic groups.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give it up to the Jews, but not to the Unitarians.
No. All right, so reading from the brief, the introduction. In recent years, the peace and tranquility of religious gatherings, precisely the qualities that make churches, synagogues, and mosques safe places for people to connect, share their faith, and forge community, have too often been shattered by violent attacks, most often carried out with firearms, particularly in parts of the country where public carry of guns is more widely permitted. Guns often find their way into the hands of individuals seeking to harm faith-based communities. Now, all right, so they're acknowledging up front there is an increased threat right, to houses of worship. So keep that in mind because that's important as they make further arguments.
Right. Yeah. And what the argument that they are making doesn't hold water.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. They're trying to argue that the cause of these shootings in houses of worship is because they are located in areas where the Second Amendment is more respected by law.
Right. And they're trying to argue that law-abiding concealed carry permit holders are a threat to houses of worship. Again, that's the core of the argument here. But so, and again, just to reiterate, the case has nothing to do with where you can carry guns. It has to do with how the state decides if you can carry guns. Now, reading again from the introduction, New York's proper cause provision, New York Penal Law Section 400.002F, requiring an applicant to demonstrate an actual and articulable need for self-defense in order to obtain a concealed carry license, provides a measure of protection against the ever-present threat of gun violence by limiting the carrying of weapons into the public arena by individuals who have not shown any need for their possession and use. The law thus reduces the opportunities for guns to intrude upon the sanctuary and refuge of the worship space. So,
I thought it was the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs.
Not to these jokers. So
they don't need to be publishing this on the internet. They don't need to be exercising their right to free speech. But they are anyway. Look at that.
Exactly. So if you don't have a need to carry a gun, and remember, they don't think that anybody has a need to carry a gun, then you are a threat to houses of worship.
Yeah, who was it that said I carry a gun because I can't carry a police officer?
I know that's Bob Maine's favorite.
Yeah, that's right. I was trying to remember who it was. Bob Maine, that's right. Yeah.
Bob Maine at Handgun World. I carry a gun because I can't carry a cop. So I mentioned this earlier. They cite a bunch of official documents. There's tons of pages of nothing but citations of their various church bodies and their official positions on gun violence and gun ownership. And oddly enough, I tried to look at some of them, and a lot of them, the links don't even work anymore. And still, they submitted this to the Supreme Court. That's just nutty. But they cite documents in church conferences where the clear purpose is not to restrict concealed carry, it's to restrict the Second Amendment to nothing but hunting. So they're arguing in bad faith, right? They claim to respect they claim to respect the right to self-defense by saying, well, you should have to show a need, but they really don't care about that. They really want you to not have a right to carry a gun at all, unless you're hunting. And the Second Amendment has nothing to do with deer.
Yeah, the founding fathers weren't worried about the threat of the deer population when they drafted the Second Amendment.
Those pesky deer may rise up and overthrow the government. For example, they cite the ELCA's Social Policy Resolution on Gun Violence, which calls upon congregations, synods, and agencies to work for the passage of legislation controlling the, listen to this, manufacture, importation, exportation, sale, purchase, transfer, receipt, possession, or transportation of handguns, assault weapons, and assault-like weapons, and their parts.
Assault-like weapons and their parts.
Yes. Excluding rifles and shotguns used for hunting and sporting purposes, for use other than law enforcement and military purposes.
Hunting and sporting purposes.
Mm-hmm.
That's just about everything.
Exactly.
I guess they never heard about 3-gun, have they?
No. Well, they wouldn't consider that a sport. So their idea of the shooting sports is like skeet and trap.
Yeah.
That
Preferably trap just singles, because then you could do that with a single shot shotgun, right?
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, that's the closest thing to a musket we have today, right?
Yep. The good old side by side, or the single shot, or the over under. Let's see. So back to the brief. Quote, the challenged law is a constitutional exercise of New York's authority to protect its citizens, including religious stakeholders, from a range of harms. We recognize that this court has held that the Second Amendment encompasses an individual right to bear arms for self-defense. That's double talk. We recognize that the court has held the Second Amendment encompasses an individual right to bear arms for self-defense. We don't like it, but we recognize it's there. But the court has also observed that this right is not unlimited and may be subject to reasonable regulation, including to protect sensitive places. Houses of worship are quintessentially sensitive places. So again, they keep coming back to this argument.
When they say sensitive places, I'm thinking of something entirely different. No, Bobber Jean, that's not a proper holster. Wasn't there a story a while back of a woman that was arrested because she tried to smuggle a gun in her,
sensitive places?
Yeah, when she was going for to visit her boyfriend in prison or something like that. I forget the details of the story, but that's not a proper holster. So,
are the writers of this? I mean, again, they keep coming back to this idea of sensitive places, even though this case has nothing to do with sensitive places and the restrictions on sensitive places. So you have to ask, are the writers of this brief idiots, or are they up to something more nefarious? And I think the answer is pretty clear.
But it's both. They are idiots. But here's the great hypocrisy in this, that every single institution that has signed on to this brief has no problem saying that it's not only women who can get pregnant.
Right.
Yeah. This is the same group of people that is all on board with transgenderism. Something that is clearly unscientific and unbiblical.
Yep.
They have no problem saying that, women can have penises too. No problem with that, but...
Or arguing that you can kill a child up to the day of birth.
Right.
And going out and blessing places where that takes place.
That it's not really a child until it's taken its first breath, as there have been some clergy within the ELCA that have argued that. They have no problem with that, but heaven forbid law-abiding citizens should be permitted the right to defend their lives against violent attackers.
Right. Yep. And it doesn't take long for the nefarious to be proven here, because they get to the real crux of their argument, which is that nobody should be allowed to carry guns. So quoting from, again, this is part of the introduction. We haven't even gotten right into the arguments. Regulating firearms within houses of worship alone is not enough. New York's law further helps address these threats by reducing the casual public carrying of concealed weapons, and thus the likelihood of gun violence in public places, including places of worship, where people with common identities gather and may be vulnerable to hate crimes and other incidents of gun violence. End quote.
Yeah.
So again,
they're
show
arguing
me that law-abiding citizens with carry permits are a threat to houses of worship, and they can't do that, but they keep going back to that argument.
Right. Here's an interesting statistic to throw in the faces of these. They're idiots. Let's just face it. There's no. Forget the eighth commandment and putting the best construction on everything, on anything. This is idiocy of the highest order. A statistic for our wonderful audience. Can you guess which state has the highest mass shootings per capita? Well,
it's got to be one of those pro-gun places, right?
Yeah.
It's like Alabama or Georgia or Texas.
Actually, it's not a state. It's a district. District of Columbia, D.C. They have, on average, 7.4 mass shootings per, I don't know what it is per capita, but the chart that I found, they are the highest mass shootings per capita location in all of the United States. Also, one of the places that has the highest restrictions on, I don't think you can even get a permit to carry in D.C.
You can now. I know
that's right. After the Heller decision, that's right, yeah.
What is the lady's name? Emily Miller. She is a journalist, and she's written a book called Emily Gets Her Gun, and she details the insane amount of crap that she had to go through to get a carry permit in Washington, D.C. So it is possible, but they make you jump through so many and so expensive hoops that most people just won't do it. So the people who are carrying are not legal, are not allowed or are permitted to carry a gun. Unless, of course, you're one of the connected folks, Remember, Donald Trump was able to carry a gun, and he got a permit in New York when you and I could never get one if we lived there. Right. And it's just because if you're rich enough, and I'm not blaming Trump, or this isn't a knock on Trump, this is a knock on New York and places like it. If you're politically connected and rich, you can get pretty much whatever you want from the government. But you and I, who actually do need the carry permits to protect ourselves in the streets of these crappy cities, we can't get those permits because we have to show need.
Well, and talking about D.C. and the nightmare for this journalist to get a permit to carry in D.C., prior to the Heller decision, it was a nightmare just to get lawful permission to purchase and own a firearm if you lived in D.C.
In Chicago, and it was Heller versus D.C. and then McDonald versus Chicago.
Yeah,
and both of those were about being able to. Right? Was it just owning a gun in your own, having a gun in your own home? One of them
in Clark County, Illinois, which includes the city of Chicago. It was illegal to possess a firearm within the county limits. So if you're within your own home, you could not lawfully possess a handgun. And in fact, when I was on vicarage, this was back in 2003 to 2004, there was a big case in Chicago of a man who shot an armed intruder, even though he had lawfully purchased a handgun. He happened to reside in Clark County, and they were trying to throw the book at him for violating their handgun ban. But I mean, Chicago, they never have any mass shootings there.
No, nobody ever gets killed with guns in Chicago.
No.
So Heller was the right to keep a gun in your own home because DC's law required that if you legally owned a firearm, you had to keep it locked and unloaded at all times. And Dick Heller sued to overturn that. In Chicago, I believe McDonald was just I don't think you could even. That has
in relation to a person who was, I think it was a woman who wanted to be able to transport her firearm to a shooting range, and it had to do with this. Oh, that's right. Different case. That's right.
That was Ezel, and McDonald versus Chicago opened the door for this. So Otis McDonald sued the city of Chicago because arguing that it was an individual right to own a firearm and to keep a firearm in your home. That opened the door to concealed carry in Chicago. Chicago tried to make it extremely difficult for people to get a permit by requiring you to go to a gun range and prove proficiency and take a class. The only problem was that they made it illegal to build a gun range or even a gun store in the city of Chicago.
Right.
And Rhonda Ezell and others, Second Amendment Foundation and others, sued Chicago to overturn that.
That's right.
And then
that was
Chicago,
another person you had as a guest on your show at one point, isn't it?
Yeah, she's great. She's, what is it called? Chicago Guns Matter, I think is the name of the group. And then the city begrudgingly said, okay, well, you can build a gun range in Chicago, but they created these kind of Byzantine zoning laws that said that gun ranges could only be built in certain zones. They couldn't be too close to this, or they couldn't be too close to that, and basically through their zoning laws, they made it impossible to build a gun range in Chicago. So Rhonda and the Second Amendment Foundation sued again, and that was Ezell versus Chicago 2, and they won again. So now there is actually a gun range, at least one, in Chicago. See, the problem with the way they were doing it, they were saying, well, you gotta go through all this training, and you gotta take a class, and you gotta go to a range to prove proficiency. Well, that meant that people had to drive way out into the country to take the classes and go to a range. And so the express purpose of those laws in Chicago was to make it difficult for inner city people who actually need the firearms to protect themselves and their families from actually exercising that right. Yeah. So threw every roadblock they could. It was a
nonsensical decision because they could have just gone down to the south side of Chicago after dark to have target practice, and no one would have batted an eye.
Right. Nobody even talks about those things.
I'm being sarcastic, of course, but yeah.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to dig into the specific arguments a little more closely, and we've already run up at 48 minutes at this point. So we are going to hold that over for the members of the Reformation Gun Club. If you would like to hear a more in-depth breakdown of the arguments that are made in this brief, then become a member of the Reformation Gun Club. Go to armedlutheran.us/gun club for as little as $1 a month, and you can hear extended content, extra content, tons of additional content that we have there on the website available to you as a member, including the second part of this show. Pastor, thank you for sticking around and doing this 2 weeks in a row.
Hey, it's we were a little bit overdue, so it's good to do this more often.
Absolutely. All right, folks, that's going to do it for this week. If you have any questions or any comments, please visit the feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback. Leave us a voicemail or a voice message. We would love to hear from you. Or if you have a question that you'd like us to answer or a topic you'd like to hear us discuss, let us know. We would love to hear it. Next week is going to be our 6th annual, can't believe it's been 6th annual Christmas gift list show. And it's time to do it. Black Friday coming up, of course, and with the supply chain issues, you'll want to get your shopping done as early as possible. So we're going to have some great ideas for you, for the gun owners and gun enthusiasts in your life in next week's show. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback. or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.